I now give the floor to Ms. Sarah Lewis, Associate Professor at Harvard University and founder of Vision and Justice.
Mr. Secretary General, President, Your Excellencies, Chair, members, I'm honored to be here at the United Nations amongst you today. I'm speaking, yes, as a professor at Harvard, a scholar, but also a woman raised just 10 blocks from this building. I would pass by as a young girl and think about the extraordinary leaders who would fly here to New York, to the United Nations, and do the work of securing rights for all. I'm the descendant of enslaved men and women from, we believe, Ghana and Nigeria, and also from slave owners who came from the United Kingdom. I'm the child of immigrants who came via Ellis Island from the Caribbean, who saw in this nation the aspirations for dignity and human rights. Today, I walk in with my ancestors, honored to be in this space. This is an extraordinary day, a commemorative one. The 60th anniversary meeting here marks the occasion when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. The Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination was the first treaty body created to monitor countries' commitment to human rights. This anniversary is a chance for reflection. It's a time to salute the extraordinary progress made to confront racial discrimination and inequity. But it is in that spirit that we must consider how much more work is needed today in many parts of the world to combat injustice. Many societies throughout the course of history have been built through racial discrimination. But today we know that racism only weakens the construction of states. We have begun the valiant work to confront this question. We know that tackling racism is a global concern and a global effort. We have a clear blueprint for eliminating racism outlined by the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, the DDPA, and the basis it creates for the duty of every state to protect human rights. It requires that we confront racial hierarchy and domination wherever it is found. We are gathered here today to ask a question for this generation and the ones to come. What does it take to give up the lie? When are we going to give up the lie that there's any basis for the idea that anyone is better than anyone else on the basis of race, color, national origin, or ethnic origin? We know that some around the world believe the lies of racial discrimination because of ignorance, willful ignorance. What intensifies the action required to confront racism? Accessing the facts. People don't act because they don't know. People don't act because they don't have the facts. People don't act because they don't have the truth. It is due to ignorance that people believe, for example, that slavery could ever be taught as beneficial for the skills it taught the enslaved, distorting the history of historic human rights violations and injustice. Nothing should blunt our resolve to correct the distortion of historic facts. Ignorance is not simply the root of racism. Ignorance is necessary for racism to exist, because once you know the facts, you have to act. Once you know how historical injustices have evolved to impact our social, economic, and legal landscape, you have no choice but to act. Once you know that slavery evolved, transformed to allow for decades of segregation, racial terror, and racial domination, you have to act. Once, for example, in the United States, you know that the discrimination against Asian Americans that resulted in Japanese internment justified by the Alien Enemies Act, you have to act. The question is how? How do you come to know these facts? We don't act because of law and legislation alone. We act because we transform perceptions and narratives through education and through culture. The impact of slavery and its legacy long dehumanized how we see each other around the globe. Law alone would never be enough to transform how we see. In fact, it is the historic failure of laws to redress the legacy and harm of slavery that caused other routes to be necessary for justice. It would take the work of culture to change perceptions of whose rights count. All of ours. Here at the United Nations today, on this day of commemoration, I want to advocate for one of the most overlooked, simple, but critical ways to combat the root causes of racism, questioning what you see and why you are seeing it. Consider a powerful exercise on the United Nations' own website. I was taken by it. It begins by asking a direct, powerful question: what do you see? As it shows a picture of a person, one with blue spiked hair, and asks, do you see her as a tech genius, a social worker, a sister? Another image shows a man with weathered skin, tanned, and a thick white beard, and asks, do you see him as a professor, refugee, fundamentalist, or grandfather? Another shows a man with skin darker than mine and says, do you see a doctor, taxi driver, human rights activist, or uncle? One more shows a woman of seeming Asian descent and asks, do you see an economist, trafficker, victim, immigrant, or granddaughter? It then asks us to watch our assumptions and confront internalized bias to keep our minds open to the humanity of all. What are we seeing, and why do you think we are seeing that? It's a critical question. The racial divide around the world is built on a fiction, the fiction of there being any basis for the idea of racial superiority, the idea that anyone is better than anyone else at all. The only way to convince people that the fiction was fact was to transform the narratives used to legitimate it. It turned our work as viewers into daily political acts that can advance racism or stop it. We learn how to see not only through law, not only through policy, but critically through culture. We learn through narratives seen throughout the built environment. The main vehicle for sharing facts in society is through culture. Our perceptions are shaped by the narratives they contain in the visual world around us. How do you combat the censorship of facts and curriculum that we are seeing today? How do you combat erasure? To claim the ground with symbolic cultural acts to define the narrative that we all count. We can't only legislate our way out of injustice. The vehicle for injustice is law, but it's also more. After all, what has brought us together today was a cultural act of protest. We are here because of the work of a demonstration, the work of people rising and saying no more in the Sharpsville uprising in South Africa. The lack of resolution and consistently deferred justice when it comes to discrimination must be considered akin to a collective global trauma. What distinguishes trauma from difficulty? Trauma is a narrative that's consistently interrupted. Trauma is where there is no resolution. Everything loops, everything triggers a site of pain. When societies move out of trauma, we get the resolution of narrative. It is culture that is the laboratory that transforms tragedy and trauma into story that can offer a vision for resolution when justice has been denied until it comes. The work of visual culture, monuments, markers, images, is the closest thing we have in the world to the truth and reconciliation commissions needed, especially in the United States. Culture is a critical part of the groundwork for justice. It goes by many names. It is a convening, it's debate, it's discussion, it's protest, it's monuments and plans for new monuments. Each performs a kind of work that law, activism, and more cannot. injustice movements. Culture can force more than dialogue, but a reckoning, a confrontation with truth and fact. I'm inspired by one of the first thinkers to focus on the power of vision and culture for justice and the work of ending racism in society, the formerly enslaved leader and abolitionist, Frederick Douglass. He spoke about the internalized narratives that seem to justify inequity and slavery. He made the case for the power of culture as the overlooked tool for ending racism. He said it might take over 150 years for society here, in this room and around the world, to understand these ideas. When are we going to give up the lie? When are we going to give up the lie that there's any basis for the idea that anyone is better than anyone else on the basis of race? When we come to use fully the force of culture to transform the messages and narratives that lead to injustice. Today we celebrate the extraordinary work we have done together as we renew the commitment made 60 years ago to eradicate discrimination in all its forms and honor the rightful narrative that all belong and all count. The work of culture to transform these narratives alongside law is the latest and perhaps most critical chapter in the unfinished civil and human rights movement around the world today. And for this work, we must continue and never be silent, with resolve. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Sarah Lewis